The meeting room of the Boa Vista weaving mill was silent, the kind of silence that weighs heavier than any shout. Ivanite held her badge in her hand, still wearing her apron, her fingers cold. Noravel, sitting at the head of the table, pushed a freshly signed dismissal paper toward her and said, without looking properly at her face, "Sign here and you can go. This is no place for country folk." It was at that moment that the door opened and Dr. Ventura walked in with a leather folder under his arm, followed by Bellarmino himself, leaning on his cane, his eyes already wet before he even began to speak. "Before this young woman signs anything," said the lawyer, "Mr. Noravel needs to hear a story from 30 years ago." Noravel frowned. "What story?" And Bellarmino, his voice trembling, answered, looking straight at Ivanite. "The story of a man who gave me everything he had, without asking for anything in return, and whom I spent my whole life owing. She is his granddaughter, and from today on, she is the new majority partner of this company." The dismissal paper fell from the table. No one moved to pick it up. To understand how they reached that moment, it is necessary to go back much earlier, to a dusty afternoon on a small farm, when two men still young held a handshake that time insisted on not letting die. Ivanite arrived in the big city on a morning of fine drizzle, with a cardboard suitcase tied with string and an address written on a piece of notebook paper. She was 28 years old, with calloused hands of someone who knew how to deal with land and animals, and a quiet way of walking, as if apologizing for taking up too much space in the world. She came from Sitio Vista Alegre, a small piece of land where she had grown up beside her grandfather Anacleto and her grandmother Dita. Her parents, Zeka and Rosolva, also lived nearby in a neighboring house, making their living from the farm as they always had. There was no lack of love in that family, only money, and that was why Ivanite decided to try her luck in the city, promising to send news and help however she could. "Go with God, my daughter," said Anacleto at the farewell, holding her hands between his own, rough from decades of whole work. Work does not shame anyone. Shame is mistreating those who work. Ivanite stored those words like someone stores hard-earned money, without knowing that one day they would make even more sense. In the city, the first job she got was at the Boa Vista weaving mill, a large fabric factory with noisy machines and long corridors, where she started as a cleaning assistant and administrative support. It was not the job of her dreams, but it was honest, and Ivanite always arrived before everyone else, with her uniform impeccable and a sincere good morning for every person who crossed her path. The company belonged to the family of Bellarmino, a man over 70 who had founded it decades earlier, and who now lived more withdrawn, leaving the day-to-day management in the hands of his son. Bellarmino still appeared from time to time, sitting in an armchair near the reception, watching everything with eyes that seemed to hold old stories. Noravel, for his part, had a way of treating the employees that made everyone lower their heads when he passed. He believed that money and a surname gave him the right to humiliate those who worked with their hands, and he never missed a chance to remind Ivanite of where she came from. "That one is from the countryside," he commented once, loud enough for her to hear, while talking to a manager in the corridor. "You can tell by the way she speaks. I keep wondering how long she will last here." Ivanite swallowed the words dry and continued cleaning the handrail, her face burning, but her hands steady. She had not come that far to let herself be defeated by the words of arrogant people. It was on one of those difficult mornings that she met Osvaldo, son of Noravel and grandson of Bellarmino, who worked in the stamp design sector of the factory. Unlike his father, Osvaldo greeted everyone by name, asked how the weekend had been, and one day, seeing Ivanite alone in the cafeteria, sat down at her table without ceremony. "You're new here, right? I noticed you always arrive earlier than everyone else," he said, smiling. "I'm from the interior," replied Ivanite, a little defensively, expecting some joke. "Out there, we wake up with the sun." "That's beautiful," said Osvaldo, with no irony in his voice. "I wish more people here had that habit." That simple conversation, without any mockery, was like water on dry land. Ivanite could not explain it, but she felt that, for the first time since arriving in the city, someone saw her as a person, not as a label of where she had been born. In the following months, the two grew closer, little by little, through conversations in the cafeteria, exchanged favors, and discreet laughter in the corridors. Osvaldo lent books, Ivanide taught country recipes, and without realizing it, a feeling began to grow, slowly and sincerely, like a plant that grows without hurry but grows strong. Meanwhile, Bellarmino, from his armchair near the reception, watched everything with an attention no one noticed. There was something in Ivanide's manner, in the way she pronounced certain words, in the surname written on the admission form, that stirred an old memory, kept for 30 years in a drawer of memory that he himself avoided opening. 30 years earlier, Bellarmino was nothing more than a young man without means, trying to set up a small weaving business in a city he barely knew. He lacked money to buy the first looms, and he also lacked someone who believed in him. It was on a trip to the interior, looking for cotton suppliers, that he met Anacleto, owner of a modest farm but of a generous heart. The two met by chance in a simple inn, shared a table at dinner, and talked the whole night about dreams, difficulties, and the will to succeed. Upon learning that the young man needed a push to get started, Anacleto did something no one expected. He offered the savings of an entire lifetime of work on the farm, saved with sacrifice, so that Bellarmino could buy the first equipment. "I don't want your money back double, or interest," said Anacleto that night, shaking the young man's hand. "I only want that. If one day this turns into something big, you don't forget where the first push came from. One day, when you can repay with justice, not with haste." To formalize that gesture, the two went to the registry office of the neighboring town and registered a simple letter, written by hand, promising that when the company prospered, Anacleto or his descendants would have the right to a relevant share of the business, as recognition for that initial support. The letter remained stored in the registry archives, waiting for the day someone would come to fetch it. Bellarmino used that money to buy the first looms, hire the first employees, and thus the Boa Vista Weaving Mill was born. The business grew, the years passed, and the hurried life of the city gradually pushed that memory into a corner of his mind, not out of malice, but out of pure cowardice. Bellarmino kept postponing the day of looking for his old friend and fulfilling what he had promised, and the more he postponed, the harder it became to face his own silence. Years later, already with the company established, he even tried to locate Anna, but the old addresses led nowhere, and the shame of appearing after so much time, with no satisfaction at all, made him give up more than once. When Ivanide started working at the factory, Bellarmino noticed her surname on the admission form and felt his heart race. He did not want to rush, nor call attention, but he began to observe the young woman discreetly, noticing her way of speaking, her simple customs, the education that is only learned in a serious home. He carefully instructed Dr. Ventura, the family lawyer for many years, to investigate her origin discreetly, without anyone in the company knowing the reason. The confirmation came in a few weeks. Ivanide was indeed the granddaughter of Anak, the same man who decades earlier had bet everything on an unknown young man. Bellarmino spent nights without sleeping properly, torn between the joy of rediscovering Iben from afar and the shame of realizing how long he had owed that debt. He decided, then, not to hurry. He wanted first to understand what kind of person Ivanide was, whether the grandfather's character had truly remained alive in her, before revealing anything. And day after day, he saw confirmed everything he expected. He saw the young woman treat every colleague with respect, work with honesty even when no one was looking, and endure, with dignity and without retaliating, the rudeness of his own son. Meanwhile, the relationship between Ivanide and Osvaldo grew closer and closer. On a rainy afternoon, the two were trapped in the back shed waiting for the water to go down, and it was there that Osvaldo, without ceremony, said what he felt. "I know maybe this shouldn't matter," he began, a little awkwardly, "but I wanted you to know that, to me, you are the most decent person I have ever met here. And it's not just admiration, It's more than that. She smiled, feeling her face heat up. I feel something similar. Osvaldo, I just fear what your father will say. My father, answered Osvaldo, seriously, has a way of seeing the world that I do not share. I will not let his prejudice decide my heart. It was exactly that kind of closeness that awakened Noravel's anger upon realizing his son's interest in the cleaning girl, as he insisted on calling Ivan. He felt offended in his pride, fearing what the other directors and partners might think. He decided, then, to find a way to get rid of her before it became a bigger problem for the family. Taking advantage of a small error in the filing of an invoice, an error that had actually been made by another employee, Noravel resolved to use the case as a pretext. He called an urgent meeting, summoned Ivanite to the main room, and prepared the dismissal papers, determined to end it once and for all. What he did not know was that same morning, Bellarmino had finally decided to act. After months of observing, testing his own heart, and overcoming the old shame, he had arranged with Dr. Ventura the day to retrieve the letter kept for 30 years in the registry and, at last, fulfill the promise made to Anna. The meeting began tensely. Noravel, sitting at the head of the table, leafed through the papers with the air of someone who'd already decided everything before even hearing any explanation. Ivanite, called in a hurry, entered the room, still wearing her apron. Without fully understanding the reason for so much urgency, there was a serious error in the filing of the invoices, said Noravel, without preamble, and unfortunately, we will need to terminate your services. Ivanite felt the ground give way, but kept her posture upright. May I know exactly what the error was? I am sure I can explain. You don't need to explain yourself. Cut in Noravel, pushing the dismissal paper across the table. Sign here, and you can go. This is no place for country folk. It was at that exact moment that the door opened, and Dr. Ventura entered, with the leather folder under his arm, followed closely by Bellarmino, leaning on his cane, his eyes already moist before he even began to speak. Before this young woman signs anything, said the lawyer, with a firm voice, Mr. Noravel needs to hear a story from 30 years ago. Noravel frowned, not understanding. What story is that, father? What is this about now? Bellarmino walked slowly until he stood in front of Ivanite, and it was looking directly at her that he began to speak, his voice choked by the emotion he had held for so long. 30 years ago, a man named Anacleto gave me the savings of an entire lifetime so that I could open this company. He asked for nothing more than a promise that one day, when the business prospered, I would repay with justice. I left that promise stored in a registry and let shame prevent me from fulfilling it for far too long. He paused, taking a deep breath. Ivanite, my child. You are the granddaughter of that man, and according to the document in this folder, from today on, you are the majority partner of the Boa Vista weaving mill. The silence that took over the room was absolute. Ivanite brought her hands to her mouth, unable to say anything, while tears began to fall. Noravel, pale, looked from his father to the young woman, trying to understand how that was possible. That cannot be true, he murmured, his voice failing. Say. She is the granddaughter of a man who trusted me when no one else did, answered Bellarmino, without raising his tone, but with a firmness that left no doubt. And you, my son, need to learn that dignity is not measured by the position a person holds, but by the character. Ivanite worked here with more honesty than many people in high positions who have passed through this company. Dr. Ventura opened the folder on the table and showed the old document with Anacleto's still legible handwriting and the signature of a much younger Bella. The document is valid and has already been confirmed by the registry. From this date, Mrs. Ivanite holds majority participation in the company, according to the terms agreed at the time. Noravel, seated, seemed smaller than the chair he was in. After a few seconds of silence, he stood up slowly and, for the first time since Ivanite had known him, lowered his head before her. I treated you badly, he said, with difficulty, and I am ashamed of it now. I apologize, truly. I did not know the story. But that does not justify the disrespect. I hope we can start over. Ivanite, still emotional, took a deep breath before answering. My grandfather always said that work does not shame anyone, and that shame is mistreating those who work. I accept your apology, Mr. Norvell, because I believe people can change when they recognize their own mistake. And I promise that, as a partner of this company, I will treat every employee with the respect I myself would have liked to receive from the first day. Osvaldo, who had entered the room moments earlier, unable to hide his emotional smile, approached Ivanite and held her hand in front of everyone. I already knew you were special before knowing about any document. He sighed softly, only for her to hear. This only confirms what my heart had already decided. In the following days, Bellarmino insisted on going personally to fetch Anacleto from the countryside. Taking Ivanai along on the trip, when the car stopped in front of the simple house at Cito Vista, Alegre, Anacleto came out to see who was arriving and, upon recognizing the aged face of the young man he had met decades earlier, stood still for a moment, unable to believe it. Mr. Anacleto, said Bellarmino, his voice trembling, walking toward him with the cane. I have come to pay a debt I delayed out of shame and cowardice. I brought back much more than money. I brought the gratitude I should have shown long ago. The two old friends, embraced for a long time, they're in the middle of the yard, in front of Ivanite Vita, Zeika, and Rosalva, all moved by the scene. Anacleto, smiling through tears, said only, I knew that one day this would be resolved, not by haste, but by justice. With time. Ivanite assumed her role in the company with the same humility and dedication as always, earning the respect of everyone, including Norvell, who gradually changed the way he treated those who worked beside him. The relationship between Ivanite and Osvaldo flourished, and months later the two announced their engagement at a simple party at Sitio Vista Alegre itself, with both families reunited, finally uniting the countryside and the city in a single embrace. This story reminds us that true wealth was never only in the money saved, but in the word kept. Anacleto did not lend only savings. Él entrustan Bellarmino, even after years of silence and shame, found the courage to honor what he had promised. Sometimes life places before us people we judge by appearance, by a simple job, or by a countryside accent, without imagining the strength and the story they carry inside. It leaves an invitation to reflect. How many times have we judged someone too quickly, without knowing the journey that person traveled to get there? And how many debts of gratitude do we ourselves still have to pay, even if they are debts of the heart? If this story touched you in any way, leave here in the comments which moment moved you the most. Do not forget to subscribe to Canal Cree to follow the next stories, because here we always believe that every simple life deserves to be told with the emotion it truly has.